This meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 128 of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Before we begin the meeting, I want to remind all in-person participants to read the best practices guidelines on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, most notably our wonderful équipe de traduction et interprète. Merci beaucoup. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, April 16th, 2024, the meeting is resuming its study on the Competition Act and air travel in northern, rural, and remote communities in Canada. And I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. On commence avec la Régie intermunicipale de...
Starting off with the Régie intermunicipale de l'aéroport régional de Montjoly with Bruno Paradis, Chairman of the Board. Welcome.
Wright Airways, we have Susan Wright, Director, Human Resources and Communications. Welcome to you as well. Appearing for the second hour, we have from Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, Philippe Noël, Vice-président, par vidéoconférence. Bienvenue. Et aussi Laurent Corbeil, par videoconference. From the town of Churchill, we have Mr. Michael Spence, Mayor. Welcome to you, Mr. Mayor. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, at which time we will proceed with the rounds of questions. For those joining us online, which is all of our witnesses today, if I raise up the yellow card, it means that you have 15 seconds left in the time allotted to you or the time remaining in the round of questions. And if I raise the red card, it means that your time is up. And I don't like raising the red flag because it means I have to cut you off. And I very much appreciate your testimony. So let's make sure that that doesn't happen and we'll work together on that. Donc, on va commencer avec les mots d'ouverture.
We'll be starting off with Mr. Paradis' opening remarks. Mr. Paradis, you have the floor for 5 minutes. The interpreters have not received a copy of this person's speaking notes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about the realities faced in our region, in our municipal rural airport. Our Montjoly Rural Airport is a former military airport from the Second World War, and at the time, it was the largest airport in Eastern Canada. At the time, of course, Newfoundland was not part of Canada officially. It had the capacity to train thousands of Australian, Canadian, and British soldiers. Afterward, it became a civilian airport in the 1970s, and then it was divvied up among 4 RCMs. I am a prefect of one of the RCMs, and that's that. Since December 4th, 2023, the Montjoly Regional Airport has not been linked to the Montreal Airport or the Quebec City Airport. One reason is because there's not enough passengers for this, as reported by airlines. There is a lack of reliability. There are high costs. The needs for business travel has decreased as well, and the levels of passengers are not the same as before the pandemic. By looking at previous decades, we are seeing that the aviation industry features lots of crises and lots of economic uncertainty. Of course, September 11, 2001 attacks had a major impact on our regions. People who are in our region are very affected by this, and they have to restart from scratch. Financial incentives are needed, but these efforts do not make regional airfare sustainable in the long term. There is a need for additional measures, and some airlines need to operate for 2 to 4 years before being able to stay afloat. Operating costs during the winter are also very high to serve remote areas like ours. The fees for landing are a big factor. We also need to rely on government subsidies to keep our infrastructure in order. The problems with current subsidies maintain. Amounts for renovating infrastructure has not been increased, which makes our situation even more difficult with the context of red-hot inflation. Our regional airports, for our regional airports, we need to recognize that this type of rural transport is an essential service. This would be to improve investments and help all people in our regions. These airlines need investors to develop their operations additionally. There needs to be additional interconnectivity measures and financial stability. Investments would be adjusted according to the economy. The Montjoly Regional Airport has taken strides in this measure. There are 63,000 people who need these services, and 43,000 travel to Montreal. A lot of those people go to Montreal by car, and others to the Quebec City Airport. There are about 15,000 people that go by car to both airports. This is data from 2019. In 2019, there are 53,000 people who weren't able to take those flights, so a lot of them leave to go to Montreal and Quebec City. If you add the other regions like Abitibi and Lac Saint-Jean, the North Shore, you can see that a lot of airports need additional parking. I would have needed to travel 20 hours to talk with you in person. A lot of businesses would need to take people off the roads to make their operations more efficient. It has been suggested by Transport Canada that people travel by car. I'd like to finish by saying that this has a lot of effects on service offering in our region. There's a lot, for example, some professors refuse to go teach in regions or launch research projects. There are also specialists who refuse to provide services, as well as dentists. That means that some people in our regions need to travel 5 hours for such appointments. This also has economic impacts. Investors don't necessarily want to travel 6 hours to start up projects in our regions. We have realized that even adding a few flights would help our communities greatly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Paradis.
Over to Miss Wright from North Wright Airways, and unless my eyes deceive me, already has snow on the ground where she is, in the background there.
Yes.
The floor is yours, Miss Wright. You have 5 minutes, please.
We had snow today. So hello, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I come to you from the traditional territory of the Saulteaux, Dene, and Métis people, where I work for an airline that is proudly majority owned by the Indigenous people we serve, called North Wright Airways. My perspective today will give you an idea of operating a regional connector airline in Canada's most remote regions, and to give you an insight with respect to the Competition Act and air travel in Canada's north. We are an airline that provides essential scheduled and chartered services, where our largest aircraft we are licensed to operate has 19 passengers. We service 8 communities between Yellowknife and Inuvik, with 6 of those being off the road system. We are the only air service provider in 5 of those communities. Our entire operation is based in a flying-only town of 800 people called Norman Wells, where we are central to our service. When we think about competition, we think more so about continuously improving the scale of our operations to be able to grow and provide a low-cost option for our customers. We connect largely through the hub of Yellowknife. In Canada, there are a wide range of operators doing very similar work. We represent a very small portion of Canada's aviation community, where our network is very limited in size and scope with respect to the industry as a whole. Across the north, we see very similar challenges of other operators, so we know that our challenges are shared. In our region, we face unique challenges that have an impact, like basic airport and navigational infrastructure, incredibly volatile and inadequate supply of fuel, significant fuel costs, skilled labor shortages, and a very limited market to draw from. The runways are short, typically around 3,900 feet long in our gravel. It really restricts us on what type of aircraft we can operate a scheduled flight with. Essentially, we are extremely restricted by how much we can take depending on temperature. We face seasonal disruptions on the gravel runways due to damage of our propellers from the slush. The airports have basic navigation that doesn't let us get all of the weather reports that we need. And we face crippling fuel shortages that occur due to disruptions with our historically low water levels on the Mackenzie River. These are all very big examples of very real and legitimate logistical challenges that inhibit our ability to act to our full potential, let alone create an environment for more competition. Additional costs that arise from these factors, in addition to the inflation and the US dollar, are passed along to our customers. Our ability to service with a low-cost model is limited, if not possible. Our economies of scale are just so limited. Operators also are generally very small or family or small orientated companies and have a hard time handling the incredible pace of change within our federally regulated sector. The past 4 years alone have meant more work in the management of adhering to new regulations versus working to grow and better offer services to our customers who rely on us to do so. These regulatory changes are all significant that are beneficial to us in the federally regulated sector. However, it's important to recognize that the pace of new regulations that come into effect draws a lot of resources on small airlines to keep up. The past 4 years have consumed resources in adhering to big regulation changes like flight and duty, pay equity, workplace violence, disabilities and access regulations, CTA passenger rights, and so forth. And a lot of these new regulations do come with a lot of fines that we are struggling to keep up with this systematic regulation change, and it has a huge impact on us. The new flight and duty regulations have had the largest impact on operators like ourselves to grow or be able to continue with the same level of work that we had in previous years. We've actually become less competitive, and I see that with other operators as well. Northrate's committed to collaborating and working with all levels of government to give a perspective on the ground level how operations in the North are difficult and how the Competition Act can reflect that. In addition, we believe moving forward, there needs to be more of a focus on things like paving and increasing the length of runways, navigational systems that support airlines 24/7, proper funding for airport amenities that support things like de-icing services within our Canada's North, expanding road systems like the Mackenzie Valley Highway to improve access to fuel markets and to provide more of a dependable supply chain for fuel and supplies. As well as we need to focus on understanding the strain of new regulations on companies small companies that are doing big work in regional centers like ours, and realizing the impact that it has there. And also working to provide some sort of relief support programs for airlines who are operating in communities that are, maybe there's a community that does have competition in that community, and how those companies can be supported when there's fuel shortages due to climate problems. We believe protecting regional airlines to account for their small operating area where competition is not viable and may have long-term impacts to the communities they serve. Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Ms. Wright, for your opening remarks. We'll now begin our line of questioning, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Muse. You have 6 minutes, sir.
I'm going to pass to Mr. Lawrence for a moment.
Yeah, just a brief administrative break here. We've had some changes in our schedule, Mr. Chair, and I'm just wondering if you could give us what the topics will be for October 3rd, 8th, and 10th, and in that, if you could give us an update with respect to the invitations we sent out to the ministers. Yeah, exactly.
So thanks for the question, Mr. Lawrence. I can confirm that Tuesday's meeting, we will be having the passengers from the Via Rail incident appearing before a committee. That's happening next Tuesday? Thursday, excuse me. Thursday. Next Tuesday will be the last meeting on this study, rural and remote airports. And next Thursday, we are online to have the minister appear.
Okay.
Yeah. if all goes well.
Thank you, Mr.
You're very welcome. Mr. Mees, I'll start your time now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for bringing that perspective from the front line, so to speak. We had a study at this committee back in the spring where we looked at the state of competition in the airline sector. And we heard from WestJet and Air Canada, who both indicated that some of the similar themes that we've heard from you, taxes, fees, costs, are stifling competition and obviously and regulatory burden as well. And you've both mentioned costs, you've mentioned fees, you've talked about the regulatory burden, 4 years of increasing burden that is added and constrained your added costs and constrained your resources. So, for both an airline operating in the north and an airport operating in a region where I was struck by the comment that 15,000 people in your region can, drive to alternate airports. So there's not, it sounds like a business opportunity there, but that's stifled by the state of competition. So I'd like you to comment on that, whether you agree with the fact that these costs and competition, and elaborate as to perhaps some examples as to where that is impacting both your airline and your airport, because we'd like to see more competition in Canada. Maybe we'll start with Ms. Wright.
Hi, thank you for the question. I think largely looking in our region, I did allude to the fact of that we operate in a very small, remote fly-in only region. And one thing I neglected to advise you of was in terms of population and the amount of travel that comes through our area, just so you're aware, we only have less than 3,000 people who reside in this region. And a lot of the travel that is in and amongst the region is based on essential, very basic travel needs. And that has a lot to do with the higher cost of operating and the higher cost of being able to not be able to control all of the factors that continuously keep getting hit onto small northern airlines. And as soon as a northern airline is able to catch its stride, there's another thing that just kind of hits. So I feel like, if northern airlines could just kind of do its thing, and or in my opinion, operators just work to stay focused in offering the lowest cost possible, that would probably be a lot more sustainable for the region than splitting the business up between multiple businesses or offering an environment to invite new people in. That's just some of my thoughts.
Monsieur Paradis?
Oui, vous m'excuserez, je vais répondre.
Yes, I will be speaking to this point to the best of my knowledge. I wasn't able to access the interpretation, but I was able to understand most of the question. The volume of passengers is pretty attractive to businesses, I would say. So in the past, we've seen 100,000 passengers go through Montjoly, and this is not the case anymore. What carriers can do is look at being able to go to various airports in order to get that critical number of passengers. However, unfortunately, a lot of airports have been some airports rather have to go to some airlines have to go to various airports in order to get the passengers they need, and that has an unfortunate impact on their service offering. There are fees that can go from $2,000 to $5,000 for landing fees. You'll understand that if you go from 1 to 2 to potentially 4 airports, then there are issues, and this is because a lot of these airports have been transferred to the government of Quebec, and there are an increase in prices, and this disincentivizes people from traveling and disincentivizes airlines from setting up shop there.
If I ask, because the time is dwindling down, both of you have indicated costs, and I mean obviously taxes and costs from the federal government are impacting both your airline and your airport. There was a Department of Environment commissioned poll recently that was looking at Canadians' willingness to take fewer flights or pay a surtax. That's already on top of the carbon tax, which is impacting both your bottom lines as well as adding to the costs of all the various aspects of the air sector. So maybe you can comment particularly on whether you think that's a good idea and what that does to airports in the north and in remote, which you've identified are an essential service for people in your regions, whether an additional surtax and or the existing carbon tax are advised.
En fait, c'est sûr que
Of course, any tax increase will have an effect. However, the costs for landing that have been established in order to pay for the infrastructure that was transferred to us have no common measure with regard to the taxes that can be implemented. We're really talking about our fees here for infrastructure and the landing fees. These are the ones that have the largest impact. The taxes, yes, but if you can't land a plane somewhere, taxes becomes a moot point.
Right?
Yes, and if I could add to that, for us, I wouldn't say that taxes are something that would, or landing fees would be something that would scare us away. I actually believe, if there was a mechanism, obviously, sorry, I should correct myself. Any reduction in taxes, landing fees, or carbon tax is welcomed. However, really what we would have to get at is looking at more of control mechanism for fuel prices. I think that would be where we would be at, where we would be chasing down that. How do we get control of the fuel pricing situation?
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Hanley. Mr. Hanley, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. And also I want to thank once again my fellow committee members for allowing me to substitute in for this meeting, and also for helping me to bring this important study to committee to shed light on some of the challenges that regional airlines are facing, particularly in the north. And in the first meeting of the study, which was in May 30th, Joe Sparling, the CEO of Air North, a Yukon's airline, spoke to some of the challenges. He's in his leadership, Air North has really built a strong regional airline through a lot of smart business decisions over the years, also taking some risks, also earning the support of the local population, and also developing a partnership with the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation. So very forward-thinking, innovative, and offering direct competition with mainline carriers. But still, in his testimony, he said, I'll quote him, he said, "In the post-deregulation environment, regional services have become consolidated and centralized, with many communities losing jet service in favor of turboprops and some communities losing service entirely." And he goes on to say that the risk was acknowledged in a previous report from this committee, where 2 of the 42 recommendations called for mandatory interline and co-chair agreements between all Canadian scheduled airlines. And he, in his testimony, said this would serve to level the playing field between the small regional carriers and the large network carriers by providing regional carriers with access to mainline networks. And reflected that this has been addressed in legislation in both the telecommunications and the railroad industry. So my first question is about regional interline agreements. Ms. Wright, perhaps you first, if you might comment whether this resonates, whether you see some agreement or not in this area of interline connections, and how this might support you as a regional airline.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. I overall believe that interline agreements really are a good thing for the consumer. I really do believe for our traveling public, this is something that would be wonderful to unite 2 different airlines with a passenger having one itinerary to be able to travel their entire length of their travel. The trouble where we get into, and what we've had problems with the interline or co-chair agreements in the past, is where a small airline like ourselves cannot carry the same terms and conditions as a fellow interline company. So typically how it worked in the past, historically, was that the interline agreement somewhat protected the consumer from the amount of baggage they had, different terms and conditions that they have. And for us as a small regional airline, we don't necessarily have a tiered approach for our fares, and we don't have a tiered approach for our benefits. And it kind of it goes on. My concern with interline agreements actually is just, does it expose the air carrier where they are responsible for something that happens out of their control? So typically with how it works with just like normal travel, is our agreement with a customer is to go from, let's say, Norman Wells to Yellowknife. Having an interline agreement, we now would have to work to ensure that we carry them for the length of their travel. But I would say I wouldn't be overly against it, but for a small little airline with smaller airplanes and aircraft and payload, it's really hard for us to guarantee those 3 bags at 80 pounds, whatever Air Canada or
Thank you.
WestJet decides.
Thank you, Ms. Wright.
Yes.
I don't have much time, so I'll have to interrupt you. But
Thank you.
juste, si vous avez quelque chose à ajouter, Monsieur.
If you have something to add, Mr. Paradis, now's the time. Yes, thank you very much for the question. For regions like ours, it's hard because we're not necessarily connected with other lines, with other airlines. Imagine the problem I had today connecting to this meeting. I sometimes can't get places because I need to buy 2 to 3 tickets, and this becomes a relatively complicated issue, and a lot of people end up not taking the planes. So we need to have these interline agreements in order to ensure that small carriers can be connected to one another.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to you, Ms. Wright, for the last minute that I have. But you mentioned the burden of flight duty regulations, amongst other recent regulatory changes. And I wondered if you could comment on how you would see, in particular, the flight duty regulations. How would that be best adapted to the northern reality when you're operating already with very small crews, and but at the same time often very experienced pilots?
The one thing I need to recognize is that the pilots that operate in the north are different. They're trained different. They're experienced different. The issue really is when the flight and duty restricts the amount of hours that they are able to fly in one day, provided the distance in which they need to travel. So when we are looking in our Sawtooth region between Yellowknife and our region, those are long distances. And unfortunately, I would say it's the hours, the amount of hours per day that they are able to fly, and as well as their accumulated hours. That would be what I would have to say.
En bref, Monsieur Paradis.
And you, Mr. Paradis? Yes, same issue. Imagine you have to go from one airport to another, and that's a significant increase, and that increases costs and the need for too many team members, for crew members.
Mr. Hanley. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou Duval.
Next up, Mr. Barcelou Duval, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Welcome, witnesses. I'm very happy to have you here with us today. I think this is a very important topic. I'll start off with Mr. Paradis. I found a quote from you from March 2024 in the Laurentien, which is a newspaper. The federal government has transferred the responsibility to municipalities for regional airports while observing that there are some unfair competition in this industry. The government abandoned a number of regions. Can you comment on that? Specifically on the consequences of the government pulling out from this and how these are felt today. Yes, I said this at the time. We are a former airport that was managed by Transport Canada, but we were transferred over. However, the Sept-Îles airport continues to belong to or be managed by Transport Canada. There are 3 airports that belong to the government of Quebec and to the government of Canada and to municipalities. We are autonomous, and there is unfair competition created as a result. Our own levels of government create unfair competition when it comes to our various practices. And when I said about washing our hands with it, back in the day, we would write a check to Transport Canada so that they would provide services to regions like ours. Then Transport Canada said that they needed additional funding in order to provide services. I don't believe that this was a constructive approach in the long term, but at least we had a service offering. Now, in the post-COVID era, Air Canada has stopped providing services in our region, and we are left without anything. Even though, despite asking rather the federal government for many things, I've never received an answer, and unfortunately the Quebec government has come to take the baton. So yes, ideally we would have a hybrid formula. In Quebec, they started doling out checks to various businesses. I don't think that that's the right thing. However, we do need measures that address our needs specifically and the needs of various regions. I think in regions like ours, in the businesses, chambers of commerce, and the government of Canada would be able. I would like to see rather that the federal government invest more. Yes, thank you for your answer. We're running out of time, so I'll give you another question here. You said in your opening remarks, and I agree with you. I would like to hear you talk more about this. Regional airline services, you said, were essential. Maybe can you explain why this is an essential service and how this should be concretely implemented? Yes, we say it's essential, but how do we do this concretely? You said that Mont-Joli is connected through roads so people can take cars. Do you believe that you're still essential despite the fact that there are roads that connect to your communities? It's essential for a number of reasons. We offer over 700 medical flights. That's around 2 per day. And in order to keep these infrastructure in place, we need space for planes to land. Then there's a lot of people who go work in the northern areas. So there's a need to get those workers there. And then this would allow our businesses here to have access to markets in Montreal. Health is important. People need to be able to access health services, whether it's in Quebec City or Montreal. We think that a hybrid model is ideal. Maybe it would require some legislative changes. But I think there's some basic revenue that could be ensured in order to lower landing fees and ensure better competitive practices. So if I understand what you're saying is that, Mr. Chair, if we are able to make it an essential service, in practically speaking, the federal government would have to provide minimum funding for regional airports in order to ensure that services remain. Yes, we showed this in a study. We would need 80 million. Rather, the airport would bring in $80 million. So improving our infrastructure would represent an investment. We have a fundamental mission of providing services, and we're putting a lot of that money into human resources that could be invested in other places, rather. We do not want a direct check that is signed. We want a further collaboration between businesses and other levels of government. I understand. You said that earlier that one of the biggest problems are landing fees. Landing fees make it difficult to make any operation profitable. Would the fact of having a basic funding from the federal government allow you to offset very high landing fees, and would that be beneficial for carriers? Yes. You have to understand that lowering our fees is not to make a profit. Will be reinvested directly into our service offering, like snow removal and other things. This would allow a greater number of private carriers to land on our runways. Also, there are factors at play that make it so that people would stop doing the milk run of one airport to another in order to access a variety of services. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Paradis. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Ms. Idlout, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes for your line of questioning, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witness for appearing in front of this committee. I don't normally sit on here, but I do thank my colleague MP Taylor Bacharach for inviting me to sit here today while you study air travel in the North. My questions will be directed to Susan Wright. Thank you so much for providing us your testimony. And the purpose I wanted to ask you questions is we're a little bit more comparable to what my reality is in the riding of Nunavut, because as we all know, Nunavut has 25 remote communities. They're all fly-in communities. There are no roads between them. So the airline industry is very much the lifeline for Nunavut. I wanted to do a quick comparison, Susan. A one-way ticket between Iqaluit to Ottawa is about $1,500. And the distance from Iqaluit to Ottawa is it's about 2,085 kilometers. So, and then to compare a flight from Ottawa to Winnipeg, whose distance is about 2,138 kilometers. It's just a little bit further, not by much. But when I looked at the price comparisons between Ottawa to Winnipeg and Iqaluit to Ottawa, it's astronomical. A one-way ticket is anywhere between $68 and $600. I wonder, since you're in the airline industry, if you're able to try and help us understand why there's such a huge discrepancy between flights that have relatively similar distances.
Yes, this is actually a question that I feel like has been around a lot. And being a Northerner myself, residing in Norman Wells, I know the exact same feeling. One thing that I've noticed, and I can't speak for any other airline, one thing I've noticed is flights into the North are typically less frequent, and they typically have either a combination of cargo and passengers, or they just have, I believe, maybe not as many seats. So when you're looking at from Ottawa to Winnipeg, maybe the flights are more frequent, maybe there's more seats on the plane. We constantly get asked why are our prices the way that they are when they can go to Europe for three times less the price. And really it all comes down to, I believe, the amount of seats that are on that plane and how frequent that plane is going. I know up in the North too, companies really have to look out for these surprise costs that come out of nowhere. And I know I think it was Kuujjuaq that had the same situation that we had last November and are in right now, of having a surprise fuel shortage where there's no fuel available. So when you're going those long distances, I can only imagine, although I can't speak for them, I can imagine that has a lot to do with it. And it's just, to go those long distances, I would think would be what would drive that cost up.
Thank you so much. I'm going to expand on that question a little bit, providing a quote from the president of North Star Air, who noted that approximately 10% of their flights are canceled due to infrastructure deficiencies, such as lack of precision approaches, the scarcity of de-icing equipment, and the lack of precise weather reporting. Several others noted that the lack of paved runways forces airlines to use turboprops, which have less capacity for passengers and cargo, have less range, and are less fuel efficient. I wonder if you could explain for us if that lack of infrastructure investments has an impact on your ability to operate services in rural and remote communities.
Absolutely. I would say the biggest thing, the infrastructure deficiencies, is our main problem, aside from the fuel issue. For us, we have very short, very narrow runways. Our runways are gravel. So if there's slush, let's say it snows in the spring and the fall, it's what happens. We get slush. We will go and try to fly into a community like that, and we will write off our propellers, which will be a $250,000 thing that just comes out of nowhere. We've done that before, where we are landing in our communities, and the service is so important to us, and we don't cancel our flights. We just try our best to get our flights in there. We'll wait as much as we can, but then there's some things that we just have to cancel. But we try our best. One thing that I know about us is that we do try to work with what we have. Our navigational systems are a little bit primitive. We just recently, within the last 8 years, got instrument approaches into some of our communities. And some of our navigational systems, our weather reporting isn't available after 5 o'clock. Some places have cameras, but there's not cameras in every location. So there are a lot of different things that affect it. The infrastructure is one thing, but also the availability of fuel, and just the fuel is the biggest problem for us right now. Thank you so much for your question.
Ms. Idlout, you have 26 seconds if you want it.
Maybe if you could just do on this question for the next round, would you be aware or have suggestions as to whether providing better lighting at the runways, knowing that north of 60 we have less light to rely on?
Lighting isn't an issue for us. The biggest thing is longer paved runways will allow us to take more people, essentially.
Thank you very much, Ms. Idlout, and thank you, Ms. Wright. Next, we'll go to Mr. Viss. Mr. Viss, the floor is yours, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I go forward with some questions, I just wanted to give notice of the motion I referenced at our in-camera meeting last week. This will be distributed after I read it out. That given every major road and trade route in British Columbia experienced major disruptions due to natural disasters in 2021, the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study of the 2021 floods, landslides, and wildfires in British Columbia, their impacts on supply chains, critical road, rail, and port infrastructure, and review the government's response to the disaster and supply chain resiliency. This study should allow for a call of written submissions, consist of no less than 6 meetings, and hear from the following witnesses: the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, Canadian National Southern Railway of British Columbia and Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railways, Ashcroft Terminal, Mayor of the City of Abbotsford, various small businesses, the National Supply Chain Office, BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, department officials from Public Safety Canada, Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, Transport Canada, National Defence and Pacific Economic Development, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Viss, and I'll start your clock for your line of questioning.
Thank you. Ms. Wright, I flew once in my life in northern Canada when I went from, in the previous member's riding, from Iqaluit to Kimirut, and I was both incredibly amazed at the skill of our pilots, but also quite scared about the gravel runway and the impact you felt when you landed. So thank you for sharing and giving voice to the northern infrastructure and the way that people move around in more than half of our country. You mentioned the challenges you face with fuel. Can you provide this committee with a breakdown of what a operator in the Northwest Territories or any of the territories pay in fuel? And by that I mean, what proportion goes to the carbon tax? What proportion goes to other federal taxes? What proportion goes to territorial taxes and other taxes that you as an operator may be subject to?
Okay, well, thank you for that. I would say I don't have those numbers available, but I remember in previous years we had expected fuel to be about 30% of every flight or every charter that we would take. But I'd be more than willing to get you that information. But essentially, these gravel runways, I'm glad that you've had the experience to be on one. They're not overly pleasant, and they also do they do restrict a lot of movement. So I would say, like, looking into where we are situated, we are in Norman Wells, and this is a regional center in the Northwest Territories located right on the Mackenzie Valley.
Yep.
The Mackenzie River. And in this town alone, we've suffered from low historic waters on the Mackenzie River. So all of our supplies and all of our parts for our planes, for all of our everything that we need to operate as an airline, including the fuel that is supplied into this town to offer this service that kind of supports the whole region, that water is so low the barge can't travel. And this is our second year now where we've had to have fuel flown in. We were just advised that we are expecting a $3.50 increase to our heating fuel per liter coming up here. I think they've got 30 or 40 different flights coming in supplying us with fuel. Okay. So that is going to be on the backs of us and the paying consumer.
Okay,
so
thank you for...
This is going to change a lot.
Okay. So taxes and levies absolutely have an impact on the ability of the residents that you serve in their ability to travel and also heat their homes. And you're saying this next winter is going to be really tough.
Yeah, I would say taxes and levies are going to be extremely crippling.
Okay.
And there's nothing that we can do as an airline to avoid that because we can't be a fuel supplier as well. We're an airline. We're not a fuel supplier. So we are expecting a lot to kind of get out of hand this fall.
Thank you. In your opening statements, you talked about the challenge of keeping pace with the number of regulations that you face. Now, I believe one other committee member covered the flight and duty regulations, but you touched upon pay equity. Why has pay equity been a challenge for your company?
Pay equity actually hasn't been a challenge for our company. And the point that I was trying to get at was that small airlines like us exist in Canada. It's not all just WestJet and Air Canada that have huge corporate offices, and they have a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of small operators in the north that are doing a very good job in terms of working to connect Canadians. These companies like ours have a hard time within the companies themselves to handle all the regulatory reform. So
let's stop right there on regulatory reform. So are you stating that the regulations coming from Transport Canada are written in a way or designed in a way that reflect the needs to regulate the larger airlines in Canada, but don't reflect the nuances of small operators in Northern Canada?
That has been something that has been continuously mentioned, that the flight and duty regulations in particular were not written for the North and do not provide an opportunity for Northern operators to do the work that they need to do with respect to their goals under the flight and duty regulations. But
now, quickly, sorry, I'm running out of time. With my remaining time, what would you recommend to this committee to change in respect to that regulation you just made to make it more equitable for northern and rural operators such as yours?
Pilots need to be able to fly longer hours, I believe. I believe the regulations need to be written for the North, and they need to work with the Northern Air Transport Association to be able to find a solution and honestly just send out regulations at a pace that is achievable for small Northern airlines to keep up with and keep them to scale of what the size of the company is. And just recognize that burden.
Just to reiterate, keep our regulations to scale to reflect the nuances of northern operators. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viss, and thanks, Ms. Wright. Next, we'll go to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today. Of course, living in rural Canada, we all know as we travel across the country, living in rural Canada, it's a real challenge. When we started this study, we talked about how maybe more competition, I guess, from different airlines or less competition from giant airlines like Air Canada and WestJet and so on might be some of the things that we would need to see some reduction in airfares and perhaps better service. And obviously, Ms. Wright, in northern Canada, as in northern, where you live, and in my province of Newfoundland and Labrador, we see the same challenges. We know that the airports that were built by the Americans in the military airports like Goose Bay, Stephenville, Gander, and others, some of these airports, of course, were divested back in the 90s and are struggling to survive. So when we talk about economies of scale and location of airports, obviously that's a major factor in terms of being able to be competitive and to keep costs at a minimum to the people that use the services. So first of all, I'll come back to you, Ms. Wright, but Mr. Parody, in your situation, you talked about how people drive to Montreal or Quebec City and so on. Can you speak to maybe how you try to collaborate with partners or other industries or organizations to promote travel in your region and to try to minimize cost or try to improve services for the people you serve?
Merci pour la question. En fait,
Thank you for the question. Currently, now, we're turning towards chambers of commerce for consultation on this file. There are health organizations that fall under the responsibility of the Ministry of Health in Quebec. We are in talks with the university. We are in talks with the various schools that have needs in our area. We are speaking with the provincial ministries, and the objective in all of this is to put all of the air transport needs together in order to get a clearer picture of the situation at hand. Then we asked a carrier to, if it was possible, to provide the service. There are a number of businesses that needed flights to go to Toronto for contracts in the GTA. So we are talking with businesses across the region, and the objective is, like I said, to have a crystal clear portrait of the situation at hand. And then we can go to the government of Quebec and see if there's a program to improve our services offering with a carrier in the short, medium, and long term.
Yeah, so would trying to entice or inviting other competitive airlines to fly into your airport, would that make any sense?
actuellement, nous n'avons pas la. On peut,
Currently, there is no competition that is possible because there's nobody to offer the service. The only time where there was competition, both services actually faded away and disappeared because there wasn't enough passengers to keep those two businesses afloat. Now, there's talks of regulations to reserve certain time periods for flights for various competitors. Back in the day, when there was some success, when a small carrier had some success, Air Canada would undercut the market and take all those passengers. And then 6 months to 1 year later, the service offering disappeared completely. So we're trying to put into regulations strict schedules that would allow for small carriers to play a bigger role.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Merci, Mr. Paradis.
Thanks, Chair.
Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Bas.
Thank you, Mr. Paradis. Next up, we have Mr. Bassadou-Duval for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I heard, Ms. Wright, when you were asked a question on competition, you said that it could be that having a lot of carriers in a small market could be problematic because of the passenger volumes. Mr. Paradis, you echoed that statement. I know that you had worked on a project to find an alternative to this issue. The project was called Region Air. It seems that the UMQ, the Union des Municipalités du Québec, had a similar project to allow regions to have boards where calls for tenders could be issued, and this would be the most competitive the most competitive player would get the contract. There's also a mention of exclusivity rights. What is the current situation here, and what obstacles are you facing when implementing the solution if the regions actually want this? At the moment, now we're working on the 2.0 version of this project. Yes, initially we wanted to have an adequate level of competition where various carriers could apply for services. So you would have a lot of competitors for one period, and then there would be another situation a year after based on what services were needed. In a 3 to 5 year range, we wanted to have another call for tenders. Like Ms. Wright, for what Ms. Wright said, we cannot follow that approach because we don't have the critical mass. But I spoke earlier of what we're actually doing right now. We're putting all stakeholders together in order to get a crystal clear picture, and then we're going to take measures. There are legal issues at play right now. There are things that we cannot do as a municipal entity. Sometimes, when it comes to calls for tenders, we can't always do the steps that we'd want to do. There are legislative obstacles. Since we're at the federal level, can you talk of these barriers or these obstacles? Could we create solutions to fix this? In 10 seconds, Mr. Paradis. I think that only carriers can do charter flights, so that's one thing that we could change through legislation. Thank you, Mr. Paradis. Thank you, Mr. Barcelo-Duval.
Ms. Sidlaut, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes, please.
I just wanted to ask a couple more questions to Susan regarding approaches and visibility. I've heard from Calmer that they're quite concerned with the changes that are being made to the regulations. Because right now, for example, in Baker Lake, the visibility that's allowed is half a mile before a pilot can choose to make an approach. Whereas if it were changed, if the regulations were changed, it would be 2 miles of visibility. Their concern is that there's already a lot of cancellations that happen because of the lack of visibility. And I wonder if you could describe for us what kind of impact the regulations you think would have on the visibility because of the lack of weather reporting, maybe.
I'd have to say, I don't think I could comment on that in terms of the changing regulations. I do know that some airports have different clearances. And I know, for example, here in Northern Wells, I know it's 1/4 of a mile visibility is what they can go into because they have a certain approach called a LPV, I believe. So I think across the north, I'm just not too familiar with the different approaches in different communities. In our particular area, we just got instrument approaches into some of our communities in the last 8 years or so. So I wish I could comment, but I don't know enough about. Miles Kane would have been a great person to talk to about that. So he'll be on next week, I think. You may have to ask him.
Okay, so maybe this question you can answer. Apparently in southern airports, they can rely on 24-hour weather reporting. But in Nunavut, the weather reporting is quite limited to just either at 5 or sometime after 10. Could you tell us what your experience about not whether you have reliable weather reporting that you can use, or what kind of impact that has not being able to rely on weather reporting?
Okay, weather reporting is essential for the landing of any aircraft. Any pilot before they start their flight, they usually are seeking out the weather and they're getting the reporting, but also they're speaking to a mixture of either a CARS agent or they're looking at a camera system. Like, let's say, for example, in one of our communities, Coval Lake, it's a camera weather reporting system. So it's reporting the weather and the altimeter and all of the settings they need to the pilot when they're in the aircraft. Some of the communities that have like traditional agents that are only there till 5, then they unfortunately after 5 o'clock, they're not able to get the weather unless they have another there is a reporting system that you can get from them, like a report, but it only lasts for 1 hour.
Thank
so
you.
if your flight is longer than an hour, it doesn't apply.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright. Next, we'll go to Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur Paradis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Paradis. Thank you for being with us today. You spoke of red-hot inflation earlier. What has been the impact of inflation on your business? There are multiple impacts. Wages have increased. The price of fuel has increased. There are various technologies, and those components prices have increased. So a lot of things have gone up. In the regions, we have fewer suppliers, so there's not as much competition as elsewhere. And so that has led to cost increases across the board.
Has the carbon tax affected your business?
Je vous dirais que ce qui affecte le plus.
I would say that the one thing that affects our community, our region the most, has been the fact that there is not a long-term vision by the various governments for the region. It's not so much the carbon tax. A lot of governments, that is federal, provincial, and municipal, have a short-sightedness, and there is a need for a longer-term vision. That is what is mainly needed instead of making changes to taxes or programs.
Vous avez mentionné que...
You mentioned that some professors at universities refuse to teach in your region, and that certain profs refuse to offer services, or certain professionals refuse to offer services. Do you know why these professionals refuse to offer services in those regions? Yes, because they don't want to drive. It'd be too long. So when they get offers left, right, and center, they will choose to go to other regions, simply put. Back in the days, people would take the plane. Sometimes today, we ask people to drive 6 to 7 hours for surgery or for courses. They refuse outright. So then people in our region need to go to large city centers, and that's very expensive.
Ms. Wright, you mentioned the impossibility of keeping up with regulations over the past 4 years. Can you expand and give some examples of how these regulations are impacting on your business?
Yes, thank you for that. I would say that the one regulation that really is kind of the elephant in the room is the flight and duty regulations. In order to implement the flight and duty regulations, we had to employ more people to manage the hours for the pilots. We had to hire more crew schedulers. We had to have people constantly auditing because of the incredible intricacy of these flight and duty regulations. They are night and day different from the ones that we previously had. The amount of things we have to track is just so much more cumbersome. We have had to hire we lost 30% of every pilot's hours, so we had to hire more people, which just increases the cost for everything that goes along down the line, like training, all of the, training 2 pilots on a plane instead of 1. And there's just such a huge economical impact of these regulations to us. The other regulations that I was talking about is mainly just administrative resources for legal services, for training of all of our staff members, and just all of the development of the manuals. We're talking like $50,000 sometimes to create a manual. So there's just a lot of regulations that come out, and it's all just happening so fast. And historically, I've been in this company for 15 years. It's very fast. And so I think that my message is, those people who are developing these manuals and implementing these regulations need to also be focused on providing low-cost options to our consumers and finding a way to make travel better.
Do you have any ideas of what those low-cost options would be? What could be reduced to facilitate more optimization of your business?
If the goal is to offer competition and to have competition to lower prices, in a region like ours, where there has historically only been enough demand for one company, I believe the best thing that you can do is support those operators with proper infrastructure and proper amenities so that they can flourish and grow.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright, and thank you, Dr. Lewis. And finally, for this round, we'll go to Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Mr. Chair, just some clarification with respect to some comments that were made by Ms. Wright with respect to smaller operators. I think the fact of the matter is that operators have more flexibility, like on APPR and accessibility, even when we have the FD and DT flight time, duty time. The regs that regulate flight time for pilots, essentially we gave them a buffer to comply. Regarding the flight time for pilots and pilots, they comply with any other airline because it's about safety, Mr. Chairman, and that's what it all boils down to. So I guess somewhat subjective, but at the same time, there has to be some clarity with respect and some context in terms of the comments that were made. I also want to add, Mr. Chairman, that to understand the feedback from northern and smaller operators, Transport Canada, as some may know, launched an initial consultation back in May of 2024. And with that, we are currently assessing the feedback. But once again, Mr. Chairman, safety will always be a top priority. So again, I just wanted to make that clarification as well as give that information. And by all means, any member of the panel that may want to give comment, further comment, feel free. But what I really wanted to drill down on, Mr. Chairman, is the business. And it's ironic because I did have a meeting today with Kelowna, the Kelowna Airport, and some of this is what we were talking about with respect to the business of the smaller airports, strategic plans, priorities, action plans, and ultimately the opportunity for further revenue to be generated besides just the revenue generated from the airport operations itself. Some of that revenue is somewhat limited because of the regulations that TC puts on the smaller airports, which is what I want to drill down on. As I stated in the past, supply chains, yes, deal with goods, but they also deal with people as well. And supply chains depend on the capacity that are allowed and or invested in to the smaller airports. And a lot of it is multimodal in fashion, rail, road, air, and water. But in this case with air, we have to give more mechanisms available to them for more revenue generation. So that's the first question I have, is what is impeding the airports with respect to regulations that can otherwise, if opened wider, can actually encourage more business and therefore revenue generation on the lands and or within the airport's business plan. And secondly, to that, what regs specifically might be preventing that? I'm going to start off with Mr. Parody. because he started talking about some of those business opportunities that might be available in his area.
Je vais essayer de répondre.
I'll try to answer. I have to admit I did not fully understand the question since English is not my mother tongue. One example of a limiting factor or something that would impede business opportunities would be the following. We spoke earlier of the flight hours. For instance, a flight from Montreal to Montjoli would have to go to Gaspé, and this would have a significant impact because you'd have to add another team. So the flight becomes impossible from a competitive point of view with regard to the numerous fees that are added. So when we talk about regulations applying to businesses of scale, I think we need to think about this because small carriers have to face regulations that larger operators do not because the business practices are so different. But with regard to regulations specifically, I have to say that it's not about the ones that are in place right now. There are some safety regulations in place, but what we spoke of recently was the number of flight hours for pilots.
Further comments, Mr. Chairman, from other members of the panel?
Are there any others who would like to respond to that question?
None. Okay. With respect to what I asked earlier about the feedback that Transport Canada was receiving from northern and smaller operators back in May 2024, was there any comments on some of that feedback that members of the panel would like to provide us? And I want to say this. You know, when we have these studies and consultations with members of the industry, it's not the answers to us that matter, it's the answers to the analysts, because the analysts will take that and ultimately make it part of the final report. And of course, from there would be recommendations to the minister. So to those that are on the panel, are there any other comments that you want to make on the questions that I've asked? With none. Okay, moving on. Yeah, time's up? Ah, geez. Okay, go ahead.
Quick question to the members. Do I have approval to ask one simple question to the members, to the witnesses? Thank you very much, members. I appreciate it. The question is for Mr. Paradis and Ms. Wright. We had a previous witness who had spoken to the benefits of installing aluminum runways in the north. And had kind of given us the pros and cons between installing aluminum runways in the north versus paving. And I'm wondering what your thoughts were on whether this is something that should be looked into more and something that should be perhaps considered for support for northern and remote runways. And perhaps I'll start with you, Monsieur Paradis.
On parle, j'ai bien compris, de...
We're talking about gravel runways, aluminum. What do you...
Moi, je m'y connais pas. Nous, on est asphalté, là.
I don't know anything about that. We have asphalt. I think that Ms. Wright is better positioned to speak about that. I don't have any expertise with regard to the difference of various materials of runways.
Ms. Wright.
Thank you, Ms. Wright.
Yes, that's been something that has been floating around for a very long time. And I think, honestly, any alternative surface to gravel would be welcomed in terms of finding some way to be able to operate on anything but gravel. I think the gravel's the worst.
And we'll end on that note. On behalf of all members of the committee, I want to thank you all for your patience as well as for your testimony for this very important study. With that, I'm going to suspend for 2 minutes, colleagues, while the members of the audiovisual team set us up for our next panel. This meeting is suspended.
Merci.
We'll begin with our second round of witnesses, and for that, je vais passer la parole à la Fédération des chambres de commerce.
I'll be handing the floor over to the Fédération des chambres de commerce du Québec for your 5 minutes of opening remarks. You have the floor. Good afternoon. My name is Philippe Noël, and I am the Vice President, Public and Economic Affairs for the Fédération des chambres de commerce du Québec. I am accompanied today by my colleague, Laurent Corbeil, Public and Economic Affairs Advisor at the FCCQ, also responsible for transportation and logistics. A quick reminder, if you will, thanks to our vast network, we represent 1,000 corporate members and more than 45,000 businesses operating in all sectors of the economy throughout Quebec. The FCCQ is the largest network of business people and companies in Quebec. It acts both as a federation of chambers of commerce and the Quebec Chamber of Commerce. The FCCQ is also a member of the Quebec Ministry of Transport's Task Force on the Revival of Regional Air Services. The FCCQ believes that all levels of government have responsibility over managing land use, and to that end, our regions need to be as accessible as possible. Canada being a big country, air travel is often the most efficient way to move people, especially across Quebec. The FCCQ believes that access to regional air transport is essential in order to ensure the vitality of our regions, promote their economic influence, and connect them to global destinations via the international airports of Montreal and Quebec City, among other airports. We believe that governments would do well to change their view of regional air links and airports, seeing them more as tools for economic development rather than mere costs. Given that regional air transport is a major concern, particularly in Quebec's regions, the FCCQ is calling on all levels of government to modernize regional airports. This would promote access to our regions and further develop promising projects that create wealth for all Quebecers. We must constantly adapt and innovate in the face of increasingly fierce competition. These investments are necessary. Airport infrastructure is essential to economic development in remote areas. There are also important, even vital infrastructure in some communities, both for transporting people and goods via airline. That is why it's so important for businesses and communities to have access to frequent commercial air links, not only for delivering goods, but also for business travel. They represent essential infrastructure for certain public services, including forest fire fighting, emergency transport for healthcare, but also for developing certain projects in resource regions, so for example, fly-in and fly-out in certain mining operations. Currently, several regional and local airports are in need of modernization and development. We need to remember that regional airport authorities have no financial leeway to improve their services. Some chambers of commerce have argued that government investment in infrastructure should at least match that of the intermunicipal airport authorities or boards, which is not the case. Other infrastructure needs are more demanding in terms of funding, whether for runway maintenance or terminal upgrades, among other needs. In fact, the current capacity of certain infrastructure poses occasional or seasonal limitations to air service in various regions. These include runway rehabilitation, equipment, runway extensions, etc. Improvements could include incentives for expanding air links, thereby enhancing the notion of a competitive market in our industry. On other occasions, the modernization of airport infrastructure represents nothing short of ensuring economic benefits for a given region or being able to offer emergency services to citizens. This is particularly true in the Magdalen Islands airport. Because the runway is too short, cargo planes can't land there, preventing Magdalen Island's lobster from being exported by air. The same applies to new emergency passenger aircraft, which require a longer runway than is currently available. Furthermore, with increasingly extreme weather conditions, extending the runway would reduce the number of canceled flights. We have made the federal government aware of this fundamental expectation to no avail. Companies need to be able to share their expertise and make contacts. Due to the length of their travel, some people are forced to use a mode of transport other than regional air services, which leads to a loss of productivity and hinders the growth of businesses when it comes to developing their markets. Thank you for listening, for considering our our recommendations, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you very much, Mr. Noel.
As discussed, I think we should prioritize the presence right now of the Chambre de Commerce representatives to ensure that we can ask them questions. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Spence, if you'll permit us, we would like to first gear our line of questioning to the two representatives from the Chambre de Commerce, and in about 12 minutes' time, we'll be able to focus on you, sir, allow you to give your opening remarks, and then have our line of questioning directed to you. Does that work for you, Mr. Mayor? Thumbs up? Yes, sir? OK. Donc, on va commencer avec...
So we'll start off with Mr.
The floor is yours. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Mute.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I'm glad we're able to ask questions of Monsieur Noel and Monsieur Corbet. You've articulated well some examples of the economic opportunities that exist, particularly in resource regions throughout Quebec, but also I think that has been the case in the course of this study as we look at northern and other areas of the country. There are lots of opportunities, and one of the concerns that we've articulated is there are a lot of impediments to that essential air service that we need, not just to move workers and people, but to service those regions, which are going to be important to our current economic opportunities, but also our future economic opportunities. And so, taxes and fees and red tape we heard from the previous witness from the airline in the northern region. So I just want to know if you could add a bit more to that, because it's an important that we not just look at ways the federal government can invest in the infrastructure, but how do we remove some of the impediments so that those economic opportunities can be seized?
Oui, je vais commencer, puis je vais...
Yes, I'd like to start off, and then maybe my colleague Laurent can chime in as well. When it comes to obstacles that we're facing apart from infrastructure, obviously there's pilot availability. That's something that has a colossal impact. We are speaking with some groups who are interested in regional air transport, and we're talking about the extent to which the federal government could create regulations to reduce timelines for obtaining certain licenses, and how to increase the number of flights that are authorized without compromising security. At the moment, I'd say it's one of those things are obstacles to carriers offering reliable service. It's a major obstacle, and the business community is just simply not convinced of the relevance of cutting the number of allowable hours rather. Of course, we believe that there's a way to do this without compromising security, and in a way that would create an adequate service offering for pilots. Also, there is a need for additional funding on studies. Pilot apprentices face significant challenges in this regard. We believe that the Quebec government could have discussions with its federal counterparts on that file. Perhaps the federal government could amend the regulations in order to help with the pilot shortage that we are facing. So that is one of the problems we're facing today.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Noel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noel. Next up, we have Mr. Lauzon. You have the floor for 3 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses from the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec. Mr. Chair, I have a question for you, various witnesses. You spoke of the economy and the role played by small airports. What role do you play with smaller chambers of commerce where some regions are not represented by chambers of commerce? I just want to get a clearer picture of the dynamics and the roles that you play in this regard. Yes, that's a perfectly relevant question, as we are the Federation of Chambers of Commerce, so we represent 120 chambers of commerce, and these chambers of commerce exist across Quebec. We often talk with representatives of various chambers of commerce, and we play a middleman role. We get everyone together in order to hear their opinions, and at the moment there's a consensus that the current system just doesn't work. We have this observation that a free market is simply not working, and rather that we would need a regulated market. It would require. It's an interesting position to be in. We would need an ideological shift because we generally support the free market, but when it doesn't work and the limits are reached, well, then there needs to be changes. We have supported calls for tenders for carriers across Quebec and other air links. There is a need to have more air links without compromising profitability, and we're supporting that. This has been the fruit of various discussions among chambers of commerce as they have developed their consensus for regional air travel. Okay, I don't have much time, so quickly, you seem to be favoring certain things. We've heard from other witnesses that one of the problems is the transfer of airports that previously belonged to the federal government to the transfer from the federal government to the private sector. Do you believe that the best solution is to support the private market in order to find better solutions and make airports more profitable and offer more services for the businesses you represent? Now I'd like to give the floor over to my colleague. We say that the federal government has a responsibility. In fact, all levels of government have a responsibility here. That is to provide more funding for improving infrastructure and for enhancing services offered by air carriers. For example, airports and airport authorities have a lot of costs that end up being handed down to carriers, and then carriers end up handing down those costs to passengers. So we know that when there are some fees that are added, these will trickle down to passengers at the end of the day. We believe that there are many solutions. My colleague mentioned a few of them earlier. For example, there is a shortage of pilots. That is a problem in and of itself. But also landing fees. We heard of the fact that some airplanes need to go to various airports in order to ensure a profitable voyage. So there are some measures that could be used for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Next up, we have Mr. Barcelo-Duval. You have the floor for 3 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today. Mr. Noel, you said in your opening remarks that you are part of a task force that was created by the Government of Quebec on rural air transportation in Quebec. And we also heard from Daniel Côté as a witness. I believe that he was he was appearing in on behalf of the UMQ, and the federal government did not appear in this, or rather the task force was not invited. Can you add on that? Yes, absolutely. I think that it would have been important to have that for the federal government to be there in that meeting with air carriers. Our call for tenders, we developed it with Daniel Côté and other stakeholders, was to create air links for regions in Quebec. We're not talking about air links with foreign countries. We want there to be air links for specific destinations, and it's not just the government of Quebec that should have that responsibility. The federal government should assume its responsibility as well. There are federal regulations that are featured in discussions with this task force. There's some regulations that should be changed. We mentioned pilots earlier and pilot flight hours. So yes, we do believe that the federal government should be playing a role here. I know that we have limited time, but I would maybe say something. Could you submit a list of recommendations that you would like to see implemented, and then that could buttress your testimony today? You spoke of the the issue of management boards. You also spoke of investments in infrastructure. Some witnesses said that there is not enough investment in infrastructure from the federal government. Others said that the federal government could reinvest the money that they are taxing back into airport infrastructure. Do you have any comments on that? Well, when it comes to the costs for airport to remain, these costs can be very high. We would like to see a decrease of rent. That is the money that airlines and airports pay to stay where they are. There are other costs that are needed for maintaining infrastructure, etc. Sometimes these are related to carriers, but sometimes these are passed down to carriers, but also directly to passengers. So there seems to be a need to reduce airport rent. Thank you, Mr. Noel. Thank you, Mr. Barcelo-Duval. I'd like to thank Mr. Corbeil and Mr. Noel for being here today.
Now, and colleagues, we can focus our attention on the mayor of the town of Churchill, Mr. Michael Spence. Mr. Michael Spence, on behalf of all members. Oh,
can you hear me?
You know what? You're right, Ms. Idlaut. I completely neglected to give you the opportunity to ask questions to the Chamber of Commerce, and I want to apologize sincerely for doing that. I will make sure that you are given additional time to ask questions to Mr. Spence, and please accept my sincere apologies. That's the first time that has ever happened to me on this committee.
I would give UC to Ms. Ellicott going first there. So.
Perfect. Okay, so Mr. Mayor, Mr. Spence, I want to thank you for your patience. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, sir, for your opening remarks, should you choose to deliver them. And then, as is proposed by the committee, we will allow you, Ms. Idlaut, to start. And once again, we apologize. So, Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, sir.
Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to be a part of this very important discussion. For northern communities like Churchill, air transportation is a critical lifeline. It's critical for our medical travel, food security, tourism, and economic development. In our case, the issue with air travel hasn't gotten better in the past while. We are somewhat unique to other communities. We have significant infrastructure. Our airport was originally built by the military as part of the Fort Churchill military installation. Our airport is probably one of the longest in northern Canada. It's a 92-foot asphalt runway capable of handling any large aircraft. Today, it's supposed to serve as a public airport with scientific research, ecotourism, medical transportation, cargo, and freight resupply, along with travel between Churchill and Winnipeg. However, this critical piece of infrastructure is being underutilized, leaving Churchill underserviced by air for both passengers and cargo. Churchill is, as we know, is a world-class destination, and it is one of the furthest north airports connected by land to Canada's northern territories. This substandard service constrains economic growth and stunts opportunities in Canada and Churchill with Northern Manitoba's Indigenous and Northern communities. Airlines do not properly consider economic and community impacts, especially to Northern Indigenous communities. In the past, Churchill served as a critical regional hub connecting the region to Winnipeg and Nunavut. In fact, I want to take an opportunity on this point because it's deeply important, especially after we took part in Truth Conciliation Day yesterday across the country. Churchill, for many centuries, was connected with our neighbors to the north. In the Kivlik region of Nunavut, The link between my home community and Kivalliq is one of the major cultural importance, bringing together families and generations of people who have worked together, lived together, and looked out for one another. This traditional linkage between our community has now been effectively it has been severed and severed by air travel schedules that don't factor in both these kinds of traditional communities and linkages. As a result, historic connections with traditional cultures and trade, historical land connection have been effectively served. Airport and air travel planning doesn't line up with community objectives to serve the community's interest. This is a major concern for many people in Churchill and the North, and it is an issue that factors into air travel decisions that are subject to a monopoly. Communities need often left out of airport planning. For example, often government tenders also don't work well with regional and community initiatives and priorities. Tenders for cargo, medical transportation, and passenger service aren't aligned or meeting community needs. Churchill, as you know, is an international tourism destination. Canada is marketing Churchill to the world as the best place to look into the eyes of a wild bear, and also the beluga whale capital of the world during the summer. There is no better place to kayak with thousands of beluga whales. And yet tourism operators are sometimes forced to hire private 737 jet service and ATR 72 and 42 passenger aircraft for periods of the year. This creates further division in the community, and at times it's easier to get tourists in and out of the community rather than local folks having to book to go and visit their grandchildren in the South. The bottom line, that is embarrassing to talk about our airline service, and something has to change. As you folks are probably aware, the redevelopment of the Port of Churchill, the hard work that we've been doing to revive the port, the Hudson Bay Rail Line, finally fulfilling the promise of Canada's Arctic Trade Corridor. The ownership model behind this is the Arctic Gateway Group, made up of 41 Indigenous and Bayline communities, including Churchill, meaning it to be a locally owned infrastructure. Our Indigenous northern communities are a driving force behind the revitalization of the port and the railway. And we wouldn't be there if we wouldn't be doing it collectively together. So, it is important for the economic activities in the North. Also helps Canada make a strong assertion of the Arctic sovereignty. All of this is possible by local leaders coming together. We took these assets back, and together with the province of Manitoba and the federal government, we're developing these for the benefit of communities. When it comes to air travel, we also want to be a part of the solution, but communities can't solve these issues on their own. The topic of being competitive for air travel in the North and rural communities is critically important. Our communities can better service. We need government and other partners to help make this happen. There are no simple solutions, but the status quo is not the answer. We need to keep these assets strong and continue to maximize the benefits to our communities. Another suggestion is to encourage more airline competition in the North by removing barriers to entry, monitoring behaviors, and look for ways to provide financial support for local Indigenous ownership startups. Local owners can respond better to local needs in tourism, science, scientific, cultural, and family needs. We can all ensure northern communities are adequately served by requiring airline to provide daily or minimum 5-day week service. We also need to limit price gouging, which is common. We need to look at models that exist in other parts of the world. For instance, in the US or Europe, where you'll see essential air service subsidies for required service. These kind of subsidies don't exist in Canada, but they can help to make sure that communities, such as Churchill and other communities, are better served and easier to access. These types of service agreements can be tied to minimum service agreements. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the critical importance of air travel for northern communities in Churchill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for those opening remarks. We'll begin our line of questioning today as promised with Ms. Idlout. Ms. Idlout, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm not too sure if the other witnesses are still here, and I wonder if I could ask my questions and then maybe have them respond with a written response at a later date?
Yes, Ms. Idlout, I was going to mention this after the meeting, but I've spoken it over with the clerk, and we would very much like for you to submit your questions so that we can pass those along to the witnesses, and I will personally ensure that you get the response that you're looking for.
Okay, excellent. Knowing that they are with Quebec and the chambers of business in Quebec, I wanted specifically to ask them whether there are specific needs that are not being met with the Indigenous communities in northern Quebec. I know, for example, that there are 14 Inuit communities in Nunavik, and I believe about 10 First Nations communities. And I just hope that from the Chamber of Commerce that we get some sense of what the needs are, that if they could maybe make recommendations so that we understand what those needs are in those Indigenous communities. And then for Michael Spence, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing some of your experience about being a mayor of a smaller remote community in Churchill. That connection that you talk about in the Kivadluk in my riding of Nunavut is absolutely true. My grandmother actually is buried in Churchill because that's how close our connections were at the time, so I understand what you're saying about that. I just wanted to ask you, because knowing that Churchill only gets Calm Air air service, what that impact has on Churchill, not having enough competition, what kinds of impacts you see to the economy, what kinds of impacts you see, what kinds of benefits could you see happening if there was more competition?
Well, thank you for the question. Naturally, the challenge that we face today is the fact that we only get 2 flights a week during the non-traditional tourism season, such as October, November. And it creates a lot of issues in terms of medical travel. Like, for instance, if I was to go to the doctor on Monday and I got my blood work done on Monday or Tuesday for that matter, it does not make its way in some cases to Winnipeg until Friday. But also understanding that the Churchill Health Centre has a contract with a smaller air service carrier to move some of their patients, some of their health professionals to Winnipeg, and also some of the blood work that's being done. But there are times where it's really stretched, and what's happened is that it has really affected the economy in a sense that when you only have 2 flights a week, it really strains the economy on the accommodation sector, the services, the people wanting to fly in and out, the tourism industry for that matter, that is not able to fulfill its arrangements for bookings. So it becomes really challenging. I think it really puts us back as a community, especially with a tourism destination, people that want to travel out. Like, for instance, I will also say that if I am to travel short notice to Winnipeg, air ticket return is $2,400. And for some people, that is unacceptable. So the whole aspect to generating economic benefits to the community, it's really critical that we have responsible air service at least 5 times a week.
Thank you. I believe that's my time for this round.
Yes, it is, Ms. Idlout. Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to Mr. Viss. Mr. Viss, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you to the witnesses, and I guess Mr. Spence is still online, so thank you, Mr. Spence, for being with us today. In an article I was reading recently in preparation for this meeting, you talked about the need to resupply the Port of Churchill as being a critical step to bringing economic vitality back to northern Manitoba. In fact, I know my leader, Pierre Poilievre, has talked about the need to reignite the ability of the Port of Churchill for future exports of fossil fuels, liquid natural gas, and other agricultural commodities. You've been mayor for a long time. What relationship does the port have with the airport, and what could we look at strategically from a national perspective to both bring economic development to your region and to empower local First Nations to have a big role in that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've done, as I mentioned, and I think you folks are aware, that we came together as communities who were affected by the lack of responsible ownership of the port and rail line. So that crumbled, and we took the initiative to basically put that back on track. And by owning these structures, we get to see that we are investing in them. We own them. This is our lifeline. So when you look at what other opportunities can be had, working with the airport is critically important. You know, as a port community, if I may use that for an example, because you touched on it, you need to have reliable, responsible daily service to that economic pillar that really paves the way. You know, we've got to make sure that we're firing it on all cylinders. We've got to make sure we're adequate in terms of providing the services that the world would like to see. The other thing that makes a lot of sense in terms of focusing on the greater growth of a region, for instance, we've got a huge runway. Like I mentioned, 9,200 feet. It's owned by the Government of Canada, maintained by the Government of Canada, the only one in its region. The fact of the matter is we need to make sure that we're investing in critical infrastructure so that product that's coming in to service the communities north of us can benefit. So what we're needing is some infrastructure at the airport that you can bring your product in by rail, and then you lift it to Nunavut, to the Arctic. And this can benefit Nutrition North and the people that live there, having responsible price points on food as a commodity.
That's very, very insightful. So to this committee, what recommendations would you make for us to consider in respect to getting the airport in a position to help the rest of Northern Canada, but also maintain Canada's strategic interests in the Arctic region?
So, absolutely. Every critical piece happens. And the investment at the airport, continue with the investment there. Make sure. But the fact of the matter in all of this in terms of Arctic sovereignty, we've talked about the possibility in terms of going back in time, being an alternate port, for instance, for Arctic sovereignty. That never happened. There's been exercises in Canada's north in terms of the Nanook operation. There's a lot more that we can do by helping invest in the port, for instance. We, as a ownership group, are responsible in terms of investing in that port.
Yeah. Just as I'm running out of time, sir.
Yeah.
So the port right now is Indigenous owned. Is that correct?
That's right.
Is there any other port in Canada that is Indigenous owned?
No. No, there isn't. So, though it's
what would it mean?
Model.
So that's incredible, and I think that sets a good standard for other pieces of critical infrastructure. If we were able to export liquid natural gas and other agricultural commodities out of the port, what would that do for local Indigenous people?
Well, in terms of, it's all about the opportunity to prosper. It's all about the opportunity to bring, a better life for everybody within the region, including the far north, including Nunavut. So how we do that, it's something that we have to work towards, and working with government is critical.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Viss. And finally for today, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Iachino. Mr. Iachino, vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mayor, when in town of Churchill was there a decrease of exportation? When did this come about?
Sorry, I didn't hear you all.
When in the town of Churchill there was a decrease in operations?
Oh, okay. Well, it goes back to it really goes back to the former ownership of the rail and the port. That would be about 2015, 2016, 2014. So the lack of investment into the rail and the port really knocked the community down.
And what happened prior to 2015?
What happened prior to 2015? We were getting grain. We were getting movements of commodities through the Port of Churchill. And then what happened was the previous ownership neglected to reinvest into the rail line. We had a major flood that basically it was a lack of reinvestment into the infrastructure, and we lost 25 years.
Sorry to interrupt you. It was thus shut down, right?
It was shut down because of the fact that there was a lack of investment on the rail side, and the rail side, the line had crumbled.
Okay. How is
there was a lack of investment.
How is the tourism industry involved in promoting the town of Churchill?
Tourism is one of the top pillars, and it continues to be the top pillar in terms of in driving the economy, but it's only one. Tourism cannot pay the full scale of operating community, for instance, but the importance of that airport is critical to make sure that we get continued international travelers into the community. So the port on one hand, the rail line on one hand is critical, and it needs to work alongside the tourism to balance an effective community.
Thank you, and I think my time is up.
Merci, Mr. Iachino. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before we conclude for today, I just want to once again reach out to Ms. Idlau to see if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask to Mr. Mayor.
Kuyanami, just very quickly, maybe if you could describe for us, whenever CalMair makes decisions about changes to pricing and scheduling, what effect does that have on your community? What would you do to help make sure that those kinds of changes that they might make have a lesser negative impact on Churchill?
Well, I think it's what's critically important here is the fact that the whole aspect of looking at subsidies for airlines to that may be one model. But the fact of the matter is, I think collectively we need to work together. working with an airline and working with the regulators to make sure that the service that we're getting is worth the value of what's being charged. So it's a collection of coming together and making sure that collectively we can carry on with a greater future.
Thank you very much, Ms. Idlout, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. We very much appreciate your time today and your testimony contributing to this very important study. With that, colleagues, this meeting is adjourned.